This afternoon we have a real treat. We have the man who literally wrote the book on Lean IT. He coined the Lean IT concept in his 2010 book, Lean IT. He's been a main figure in the Lean IT community, and he's been to this summit many times, but we're still very honored to have him here today with us. And this next speaker is Stephen Bell.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back here, the sixth time at the 6th annual Lean IT Summit, and they keep getting better every year. The stories get better, the learnings get better. And I want to start by thanking the Lean Institute of France for making this possible, for Marie Pia of Opere, for Florence for your tireless effort to make this all look easy. We know it's not. And since the summit is coming to a close, it feels like a good time to reflect a little bit, not just on the day, not just on the summit, but where we have been. And my reflection starts about 15 years ago when I first conceived of this thing called Lean IT, because I had been in manufacturing and technology for years. I had seen the kind of damage that push thinking does, and I had seen Lean in a physical environment in action. And I got on a plane one day and spent quite a bit of time with Jeff Leiker, who had just published The Toyota Way in Ann Arbor. And as one would expect, Jeff was very strenuously defending the integrity of Lean and the thought process and the people against the invasion of harmful technology, as well he should. But over time, and with a great deal of what I would call vigorous discussion and debate, Jeff ended up being very supportive. And that led to my first book, which actually was back in 2005, I think it was, which is the first time I used the term Lean IT. So it's been about 15 years, but nobody could have foreseen where this was all going. I mean, nobody. These days, as fast as things are moving, we can't even see what's going to be a year from now. But back then, nobody could have foreseen the kind of experiences we were going to have. So when it came time about 2 years ago for Karen and I, we had this crazy notion we're going to write another book. And anyone who's done that knows exactly what I mean. On what we saw as the next big thing, because we have seen years of incredible evolution. Lean has gone on to evolve into virtually every industry, healthcare, finance, you name it. And the notion of Lean in technology has evolved through Agile and Scrum and continuous integration and DevOps and scaling to large environments. It's just amazing. And the question is, what's next? And then all of a sudden, this notion starts sneaking in a few years ago about this thing called digitization. And it's really even hard to define. And then all of this excitement about big data. And what does it all mean? And so we thought, well, we'll write a book about that. And after 2 years of researching and consulting and interviewing, we decided it would be absolutely crazy to try and write a book on digitization, because practically every month it redefines itself. You hear a new story. And digitization isn't a thing. It is different to every industry, to every company. It is as context and situational dependent as anything ever has been. So we abandoned the notion of writing a book and decided if you're going to keep up with this notion of digitization, you had to have a little more of an agile approach. So we launched a blog, and we have a workshop tomorrow on digitization and big data. But without further ado, I would like to share where we're going with this keynote. Here's where we're going. It's another one of those A-B equations. First of all, how are Lean principles going to help us succeed in this digital transformation, which is yet to be defined? And how are digital capabilities essential for the modern Lean enterprise, no matter what the industry? So it's really a very yin-yang kind of relationship. The first part, we're going to talk about how do you separate the hype from the reality, because there is an enormous amount of hype surrounding this. And there is a bit of reality. And how do you determine, and this is the key, how do you determine what digitization and big data capabilities may be worth your investigation and experimentation? We're not here to sell you anything. We're here to say, you might be interested in this and not know quite what to make of it. So what do? How do you form a value hypothesis and begin experimenting on it? And then part two are going to be three what we consider value enablers to help you along the digital journey. So that's where we're going. I want to start with one of the most incredibly technology-enhanced transformations we've ever experienced. I think you all know who this man is, and I think you've all heard this speech. We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And you know what came later. 8 years, 1 month, and 25 days later, we did that. And I don't mean just us in the United States. It was a global effort. It took everybody. So I guess that's a pretty big epic, right? A big epic like that has to be broken down into stories. These are some pretty big stories. Okay? So the next time you look at a project and you go, oh, geez, that's too big. Well, okay, think about this. Mobilize a country, mobilize a world, develop the whole scientific and industrial community and industrial infrastructure to execute this. Invent, develop, test, and deploy countless new mission-critical technologies and deliver extremely high reliability capabilities under conditions we never even understood until we progressed our way there. So this was an amazing epic. And the fact is we did it, and there was a little loss of life, but there could have been a lot more, and there were a lot of near misses. So in doing this, though, arguably, the space program transformed the direction of technology and industry. And we didn't do it. I say we. Kennedy didn't do it just because it was a good idea. There was a compelling existential threat. The space race, the arms race, the Cold War. Sound familiar? So there's a lot of hype around, oh my gosh, if you don't digitize in the next few years, you'll be disrupted and you'll vanish. There's some hype, but there's also some truth to that. There is an existential threat. It is far greater for some industries than others. It will appear differently for some. Go find a bookstore. Go talk to a travel agent. You know what I mean. Okay, those were the first. New industries, new partnerships, entirely new social and economic structures are coming our way, and nobody has the ability to forecast that. There's risk, and there's tremendous opportunity. And the question is, if this thing is really a moonshot, how do we individually decide, not if we're going to do it, but to what extent we need to, and why, and how do we move our way forward safely? So it's important. Here's the chasm. And what usually happens in the early adopter stage is this great big inflammatory thing called hype, where armies of product vendors and consulting firms are out there selling this thing called big data and digitization. And then there are a few early adopters who are actually making it work and kind of paving the way. And that's where we need to look. We need to look at what is working. And I guess the first question is, what is digitization? This is our best response. Because it's not just about business. It's about how we live our lives. It's about our wives reminding us to turn off our phones when we get home because they don't want us, and our husbands and our children and everything surrounding us, the whole digital immersion that we're finding ourselves in, the pros and cons of that. And how do we create an adaptive learning human digital ecosystem where our lives are improved by this and we improve the lives of others? So, great book a few years ago from MIT Center for Digital Business did really the first round of research on companies that had been doing this for a few years. And they basically defined three broad categories of digitization. There are three ways to differentiate your company: by customer experience, by operational processes, and by modifying business models. Okay, there's a lot behind those three. So we're going to take these three as a context to lay this out a little bit. Now, with that broad context, for you, every one of you, to understand what digitization means to your business, we need to unpack that a little bit. And what I propose is a rapid unpacking. Not going to spend a lot of time on this, but let's look at it, adoption by industry sector, by technology, by application of a specific technology to a particular problem, how an application of a specific technology might vary by industry, and then this thing called convergence. So first of all, here's a word cloud. It's empirical, but not precise, based upon a lot of observations. I would say this directionally represents the degree of adoption of digitization. Of course, there are exceptions. There are outliers. The next dimension is the adoption of particular technologies without regard to industry. Again, this is a heuristic. This is my attempt to visualize. The size of the bubble would suggest impact. The positioning of the bubble on the grid suggests the timeline, sort of roughly correlated to the chasm. Okay? Just establishing context for you to go back and say, now, where do we think we are? What do we think these technologies might be that might be important to us? But then there's the dimension of the applications. Many different ways that digitization manifests: customer engagement, collaboration, workforce enablement, the product and service digitization itself, process improvement, managing complexity, and then analytics, data analytics, big and small. And I'm going to spend a little time talking about big data and small data, but really it's about data, and analytics is the key. Don't get too wrapped up in the bigness of it, but focus on the rightness of it. And by the way, it may occur to any of you who have been lean practitioners for a while, these are already in the domain of lean practice. Every one of these things. So now the question is, okay, there's a correlation here. These two should line up somehow. How do we help them work together so we don't go off and make a lot of investments in digitization technology and not realize the real value, the sustaining value? The fourth dimension, then they say, well, let's take a particular technology. Let's take mobility. And let's look at it from two perspectives: the customer experience out there using it, and our experience internally delivering whatever it is the customer is experiencing. Let's look at consumer financial services. I'm not going to read these to you, but every one of you has probably done some kind of banking on a mobile phone at some point. And on the back end, how might we be using mobility? How about retail? We just had Amy, who had been with Nordstrom's here in the last session, talking to us about things that have been going on in retail and other channels, and what's going on behind that to make that all happen. And then the last one, just because I can't help myself, is manufacturing. Because manufacturing are typically late adopters when technology comes along. But as we heard from Pierre from Toyota earlier, and we learned way back with Jeff Leiker and Toyota Way many years ago, Toyota is not technology averse. They're just very careful about it. Toyota focuses on the human element of technology, and they're very careful. They study it, they test it, and then they apply it judiciously. So it pays to watch what Toyota is doing out here as well. And then the fifth dimension, convergence. Do you believe all of these assertions? The point of this slide, joking aside, is that technology is a converging phenomenon. And if you simply pull out your iPhone or your Android phone and you count the number of individual technologies that have all suddenly come together to work together seamlessly in the last few years, you realize that there's incredibly more power in that phone than there was on the machine that landed on the moon, Apollo 11, and a lot more intelligence. And the notion of convergence, it's not one technology, it's several technologies. And that creates an almost infinite possibility of potential applications, which makes it very personal. It makes it very situational. The key is find that convergence that works for you. And let me tell you 2 stories. Here's an example of convergence. We've heard the Internet of Things. Let's say we're a manufacturing company and we've instrumented things in the plant, and then we have those instruments tracking certain failure conditions, that if there's a failure condition imminent, it sets out an alert. And you might have an engineer wandering the plant with a mobile phone, and suddenly he gets a red alert and pulls it up, and there's even a GPS that guides him to exactly the location of the plant. Maybe flip down a visor, gets an augmented reality engineering overlay of what's wrong, and diagnoses it, and the steps may be streaming video or written work instructions with a visual overlay to what needs to be fixed. And as they're fixing it, the system's gathering data on what happened this time, what was corrected, what worked, what didn't. That's feeding back into the knowledge base with machine learning that helps prevent it from happening again. Is that a fictitious scenario? All of the pieces I put together all can work together. How many companies are doing all of this together in such a skillful way now? A few. 2 years from now? A few more. The high-value scenarios that justify an investment like this. We're not talking about an ordinary machine tool. We might be talking in an Intel fab. Think about the economics with that. So it's situationally dependent. And this is just one unique combination of an infinite number of convergences that could potentially add value to a particular scenario that may or may not exist in your situation. It's a hypothesis. It's a value hypothesis. What do we do about that? Let's bring this a little closer to home. My home, our home. This is my washer and dryer. Really. We bought it about 6 months ago. It's really cool. It has all the bells and whistles, especially this one. Okay. Now, on the left, this is the website. And this is all true. It saves, if there's a problem, all I have to do is hold my phone within 1.5 inches, because that's near field communications, and it will talk to my phone and it will tell me, or I can push a button and it will give me an audible diagnosis of what's going on. And if I can't fix it, I call the service desk, and they'll be able to hear what I'm hearing, and they'll help me fix it. Not only saving me time and money, but it's certainly saving them time and money. And they're gathering performance data in the field. Okay, this is not like a jet engine. This is a washer and dryer. And this is now. This is not 5 years from now. I know 5 years ago we were all talking about how refrigerators were going to monitor the food we had in them and talk to our grocery store. That was silly. It's not that some folks didn't experiment with that, but this is real. And the key is, I don't think any of us wanted our refrigerator to know what we needed to buy, but this is good. This helps us. So there's value here. And this simple convergence, there's not much going on here, but then there's everything going on here. Because all of these things have happened in just the last few years. And suddenly here's a commercially available product. So convergence. Don't just think of individual digital technologies coming to market, but you have to think about your application. You can't just randomly pick 5 and let's say, see if this combination of 5 things converging together might add value for us. It doesn't work that way. It works the other way. It starts with the need. The hype sells the products. The whole market, the product developers and the whole consulting community, they're out there coming up with these wild scenarios and trying to sell us, and that's all good. But the real value comes from the need. So how do we find that? So do we follow the hype or do we pursue the value? Show of hands, follow the hype? Show of hands, pursue the value? Okay, I think that's a majority. I mean, I don't have anything against hamsters, you understand. Right? They're fun, they're fuzzy. And some really smart people seem to agree. Sexy isn't enough. Operational excellence is necessary to actually bring it to market. It's not good enough to be first to market if you can't deliver on your promises. And what Gartner says about big data. Big data investments have shown a slight downtick in the last year or so. not because big data is not a good idea, but a lot of pilots have gotten to the end, and companies start standing back going, oh, do we really want to spend money on this? And the question is, find the business case or the value hypothesis that makes it worth you doing an experiment. And the answer is sure. But it's no longer blank check time for a lot of these technologies. It's time to get down to business, which is value, our value. That brings us to the second part, the value enablers of the digital lean enterprise. In other words, how might we go about looking at these technologies and determining which of them is worth our experimentation? And again, this slide again, just to focus you on these three dimensions: customer experience, operational processes, and business models. So we would like to present what we think are the three value enablers. And we didn't make these up, by the way. Jim Womack came up with purpose, process, and people about 17 years ago. So, but they work. They work. So the purpose, why do we exist as an organization? Well, they're our customers. And the first principle of the 5 lean principles is value. But there's this thing called experience, too. And there's this thing called engagement, too. So it ends up being a little more dimensional than just saying value. And we need to figure out what those words mean. What do they mean in terms of actions and experiments? Process. Well, we have flow. But we don't just have flow of vehicles on a line. We don't just have flow of food through a cafe. We have flow of stories through development. We have flow of ideas through product design. We have flow of calls through call centers. We have flow of everything everywhere. Okay? And then we have the people. We have data. We have the problem solving, which depends on data. We have the context, because without context, data is meaningless. And then we have this thing called alignment. So we're going to go about defining these. But here's the interesting thing. The products and services that we deliver to add value are actually a combination. We wrestled with this for a long time and came up with a lot of cases. And they are a combination of customer experience and the process itself. One example, everybody's heard the biggest digitization example of all, which is GE. Big iron company, wind turbines, aircraft engines, medical devices, power stations. ML bet the company a couple of years ago that our value proposition to our customers is no longer selling the big iron. It is delivering the services those big iron things do and giving our customers the data to get higher performance out of it. And then ensure 100% service levels on those equipment through the use of big data. And it's still emerging. They're still learning. It's not like they've succeeded yet. But that is, so it's no longer exactly the product. It's the service and it's the experience of a customer saying, now I can do predictive analytics. And by the time that 777 lands, I have a crew with the part waiting because there's a part about to fail, or a wind turbine, or I no longer have locomotives down on tracks, things like that. So products and services blend. And then the context for the organization and the people within it, and how they treat processes, and how they treat the customer experience, those are leading to whole new business models, whole new operating models. Okay, so it's there are a lot of moving parts here, yet it can be broken down, we believe, very simply. The question is, how do you use this context to figure out where you are, where you're going? So the boundaries of physical and digital, of products and services and channels and experiences are blurring. For example, physical products and services. I gave you a GE example, but you know examples in media. Nobody buys vinyl anymore. Tax preparation services. May not take long before AI almost completely takes that over. Automobiles, you know, how often now do at least the newer generations see their automobile as simply an extension of their phone? and the capabilities. I mean, it sounds silly, but it's actually a great influencer on how the generation buys their vehicles. Digital services that may spin off physical products. 2 examples I can give are Nest and Echo, but there will be more. Nest and Echo couldn't have existed before the digital capabilities that created them, but they've created whole new physical products. IKEA furniture, right? IKEA is announcing a new platform, a furniture platform that is designed to be hackable. And there's going to be a whole industry they're going to spawn around this hackable, configurable furniture. And I know it sounds silly, but go out and check it out. And it's not so silly how any product can become a platform. Physical products become platforms for digital. Digital products become platforms for physical. The boundaries are blurring. Omnichannel, here's a big one. Heard from ING this week, omnichannel. Big player in omnichannel is financial services because you, the customer, wants the experience of seamlessly switching from one context to another. I'm driving into the bank, I want to be talking to somebody, I walk in the door, I want to switch it over, I want to go from web to phone and have this seamless, how often do we call a call center and we enter our number and we enter our phone and everything, and then the person picks up and says, hi, who are you, what's your number? It's like, didn't I just put that number in? Anybody else have that experience? And you wonder, why? Where's the breakdown? That's an omnichannel experience, or that's the failure of omnichannel. And then the products and the services that gather usage data. And had a very vigorous discussion with Dan Jones and Pierre over the last few weeks leading up to this, when there was an audacious article that's saying now the cars, the value of the data we can capture from the cars may be more valuable than the cars themselves. And Dan asked the question, well, isn't that my data? And that was a rather spirited conversation. Yes, it is your data. But if the data can be used to help you make the car safer or perform better, yes. But how do you know if you give somebody some data, they're not using it for other purposes? I'm not here to answer this question. I'm here just to ask these questions. But one great example is the reason Google Maps works so well is because everybody who's out there using Google Maps at the same time you are, that's how you're getting real-time updates on what route to take this morning rather than yesterday. It's not static GPS. That's crowdsourcing on a global level, and it only works because everybody exposes the locations. And Tesla, we'll talk about Tesla a little bit later and how Tesla gathers feedback and how they turn that into value. And I can tell you there are a lot of Tesla owners who are really happy about that. So before we go any further and put this into lean context, let's talk about lean for a minute. I know this room is full of people who have been talking lean for 2 days, but I would like the opportunity to tell you what I think about is now the way to think about lean. Lean startup, trying new things. You think you have a good idea. It's never been done before. I have a value hypothesis. How do I experiment and prove that value hypothesis in the least cost, least risk way, so that if I determine I thought it was a good idea, but it's not, but I'll pivot and try it another way, and do that like once an hour, once a day, A/B test, whatever it is, rather than spin up a project and 90 days later it's a proof of concept. Well, that was a bad idea. Let's cut that cycle down a little bit. We can't afford that anymore. So Lean Startup gives us a playbook for that. Now, at the point where we think we do have a good idea, we have proven the value hypothesis, then we need to prove the growth hypothesis. We have a good idea. How do we grow it? And that leads us into the product, software, and process development. And where are the boundaries of Agile, Scrum, Kanban, DevOps, continuous delivery, in the software development world, and the lean product and process development in the physical world, and how do they blend together when products start merging physical and digital and all of that? We'll leave that up to you to decide. But when we talked earlier this week about the boundaries of Agile, Lean, and all of that are starting to blur, they are, because the products and services we deliver are starting to blur. And so these artificial boundaries, you got to go back to the principles, because the principles are the same. The situations you apply these principles to are different. Just remember that. Next time you say, do I need to start with Agile or Lean first, or do I do this or that first? Okay, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And how do we get to it? And then there's this lean operational excellence thing, which it's not good enough to come up with new ideas and products quickly, but we've got to deliver them to market very quickly so we can get this feedback loop called profit. that funds more development and funds more ideas. And that's why a lot of startups run out of cash and get bought by the big multinationals who are waiting out there saying, we're just going to let them go a feeding frenzy, and the ones that have a great idea and run out of cash will buy them, and then we'll inherit that technology. But how to inherit that into our culture, that's sometimes difficult. But how to do that, how to make that all work. And then this big piece up here, the management system and behaviors, the problem solving, the communications, all of that in an enterprise, large or small. Developing the capability. And it all boils down to Dan's keynote from yesterday morning. It really is about adaptive learning. Okay? So, may not last very long, but this is our definition of lean based upon what we see now, particularly focused on rapid change we see in the digital ecosystem in the next few years. So, oops, there's a disembodied R. Customer, value, experience, and engagement. So let's talk briefly about that. How do you understand customer experience? Okay, I get this, customer experience. Been there. Anybody's been there, knows what this feels like. So the typical, back in the old lean days, this is what a value stream map looked like. Customer has a problem. They call. We answer a call. This is, by the way, from Jim and Dan's Lean Solutions a few years ago. Probably the least read of their books, but there's some real gems in there because they saw a customer experience coming years ago. And the innovation they came up with this is our traditional production value stream map, showing the things we do. We pick up the customer's call, we schedule, they bring in their car, we diagnose it, we send them away, we get the part in, we bring them back, we and you know, certain times and qualities and all that, typical value stream map. But then they said, there's a customer involved in this. And they didn't call it this, but what they did was quantify the customer experience in terms of time, in terms of interactions and phone calls and all of that, quality. Okay, so maybe we can quantify customer experience. Do this 10 years ago. We just didn't know what it was called. We didn't quite recognize it. And if you're able to do that, you're able to quantify two things. Failure demand, which are those failures either on our end or on the customer interaction end that cause us to have to do things we don't ordinarily do, which consume our capacity. And moments of truth. Moments of truth are any interaction in this long chain of events that leads to a satisfied customer. And if you mess up any one of those, you're going to have a customer who said, well, you know, in the end, they fixed my car and did a great job, but I sat on hold for 45 minutes and was hung up on 3 times, or this or that. We've all been there. Car dealerships, insurance companies, phone companies, you name it, okay? What if we were able to quantify this? Well, I would like to suggest that we should have been able to do this for years already, but many of us were not doing it because we were too focused on this view. But now there's this view, so you have no excuse. So now, this is Gemba, what we like to call virtual Gemba. And the question is, in the data age, how do you instrument this customer experience? Where could you tap into with cell phones and call logs and point-of-sale systems and scheduling systems and service systems and part ordering systems? You don't need big data. You probably, most enterprises with a similar process, have most of the data you need to assemble a picture composite using some of the great analytical tools that have come along lately to give a composite of the customer experience, to show you where your moment of truth failures are and show you where your failure demands are. Not from your point of view, but from the customer experience point of view, because that is, after all, what matters, right? And so forget big data. Let's just start with data. And let's say you even have 80% of the data you already need to address this. Go get it. Run some experiments. Don't throw a lot of money at it. Just run some quick little experiments and start piecing it together. And I guarantee you, you will have some low-hanging fruit. Aha moments come of that will compel you on to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. You know it's always that way. But don't make it too big. at the beginning. Make it very simple. And think about things like this. Now, this is a car dealership. I don't know if there are any car dealerships out there, maybe one or two. But all of you have something like this. Where's your call center? Do a gambit your call center. Find out why they're calling. Find out the number of hang-ups and all of that, and just get going. Okay. I have a consonant problem. I have a defect. Now, but it's at least a consistent defect, so I could fix it. So flow of development and operations. So here, I'm going to claim that I saw DevOps coming when we published Run, Grow, Transform in 2012. Of course, there was a group already working on DevOps, and Jez, who was speaking here yesterday, was one of them. And you know, this ends up being the DevOps, the whole cycle of customer to delivery, and that part's the DevOps. And then, like Jez mentioned yesterday, there's a guy named Dave West at Forrester that called this whole thing Water Scrum Paul. So this idea that we published in Run, Grow, Transform years ago, it wasn't new. There were other people out there that saw the same thing we did. And how that happened, how did Jez and Dave West and a bunch of other people come to the same conclusion about the time that we did? Because it's because it's real. It's called a value stream. End-to-end thinking in flow helps you arrive at this conclusion, okay? So it's the way of looking at the problem. And here's the thing, in our experience, that many companies are still missing. This. We'll talk to many very mature, agile organizations. We say, okay, how do you measure? You measure when you deliver to the customer, and you measure if they're using the application or not. But are you measuring the value, the hypothesis that led to the development and prioritization of the stories that went into the backlog? Are you talking to the customer? How engaged are they? Usually not. The product owner might say, well, yeah, I have a fairly good idea. Now, who do you work for again? Oh, I work for our company. So product owner, how often do you visit the customer and actually ask them and go through their models of how they value data? Oh, I visit them every once in a while. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying we could do more. And how could we use some listening? How could you use some of this data and digitization and customer experience data to get to that with their permission, of course, and help expose more value and maybe help them realize new ways of adding value with our products and services that they don't realize right now. So there's more. There's more here. So Karen and I had the opportunity last year to work with Jez and Kim, and I'm sorry, I forget your name. What is her, the third gal? Oh, we're sorry. I'm sorry, I know, I don't remember. We'll remember you later, but you were tremendous. She was the analytics guru behind this all, and they have been developing a mathematical model for several years to really come up with statistically validated. When Jez gets up and talks about the correlation between certain things that lead to higher IT performance, this is not hype. This is real data. It's several years of data. And we participated in adding some dimensions to the survey this year to connect the DevOps team, which was primarily focused on technical capabilities, to connect with the end customer. And we got some very statistically valid realizations out of that survey. And these are just value stream thinking. These are connecting the dots. These are end-to-end thinking because there is a customer out there. And most DevOps teams, in our experience, have a disassociation with the customer value. They're delivering things very quickly, fit for use, but are they fit for purpose? A question to ask. So just keep stretching the value stream out. So now let's take that DevOps notion. Nicole, Forrest Grin. Thank you. We both thank you. Thank you, Nicole. The cyber-physical thing is interesting. DevOps, connecting dev with ops. The funny thing is, Toyota's been doing that for years, right, Pierre? How long did it take them from conception to delivering the first Prius to market? 18 months? Something like that. Think about that. I mean, they didn't deliver just a new model in 18 months. They delivered the first hybrid, untested, kind of like a moonshot. So that didn't happen by accident. They did break some rules. I mean, Toyota kind of broke some of their own rules to do that because they're a learning organization too. It can be done. You know, there are other organizations out there. John Deere, big multinational, has been experimenting this with for years. And they'll be the first to say it's easier to adopt this lean, agile kind of thinking when you're just working with software, but you can do it with physical product development too. How do we know that? Is it impossible to do really big iron things in days? Well, no, it's not. Okay. Tesla, they can, if they want to, they can push an idea into the field in a week. And you go to bed and you plug your Tesla in at night, and you wake up the next morning, you get in the car, and it can do new things. You know, they can push things out overnight. Okay? And this is a real customer testimonial. So I, like everyone else, am a little concerned about privacy and how much I let companies know about what I do with the things I consume. But if they can do something like this, I still want to know what they're going to do, but I'm okay with this. Okay? So this customer experience rapid feedback loop thing isn't just about mobile phones or software. It's about real physical things. And you're just seeing the start. Tesla is a very early adopter, as I think we all realize. So we've covered the customer experience. We've covered the flow idea. But what makes that all happen? It's the people part. And people solving problems, people coming up with new ideas. Again, back to Dan's keynote yesterday. And we want to talk about 3 things specifically in the way we think about digitization and big data. Raise of hands who's seen this movie? Okay. PDCA all the way. Use data. There's an interesting thing about the technology community. They're very comfortable with data. The science community, the medical community, very comfortable with data. Us lean folks, we're very good at problem solving, but maybe we could get a little better on the data part. Okay? So there's, I think, something we can learn from each other. And that's why we're starting here. Here's an example. Actually, Jez used the same example on his slide last night from Microsoft, and this fellow actually started with A/B testing at Google, and this down here is a Spotify example because we all want to be about Spotify, right? And the point here is the highest paid person in the room, the hippo, may have really great inspiring ideas, but they're usually wrong. And it's not like their fault. And the humility to realize, okay, I might have a great idea. Let's test that hypothesis. Let's go to data. Let's do some experiments to see what really is true. And it's just true. Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, proved this years ago. And it's time to work it into our practice. So Gemba, there is and will always be the physical Gemba, the interaction, the relationships. You need to experience it. But there's also this virtual Gemba thing, where we are now getting to the point where we can see enormous data sets and converge data sets from various sources together to paint very different pictures from what we can do with direct observations. One is not better than the other. Whenever you can do both, you should try. And it doesn't always have to be big. Okay. Now, what is big data? Okay, it's volume, variety, and velocity. Sometimes huge volumes, sometimes enormous variety, and sometimes enormous velocity. But small data is important. Okay, and we need to get good with small data. So here's 2 analytics approaches. The first is problem first. Use data to help solve a question. We all know about that. That's A3. But here's a new one that has come out of the big data world, and it makes folks like us very uncomfortable. That's data first, unsupervised machine learning. We can mash up large volumes of data now, and it's going to tell us things we never suspected. And the question is, what do we do with that information? And we firmly believe, and this is actually what we're going to be doing in our workshop tomorrow, that the A3 thinking process can be adapted to both of these. It's a different process, but the A3 is still the grounding. Kata is fine, but it's the process, it's not the form. So you have to see the whole value stream, how big data flows together, how small data flows together, how the various sources of information support the flow. One example, just quickly, MIT Sloan just a couple of weeks ago published a research report, and that the case study that was right at the front was Bridgestone. One analyst suddenly running a department, spinning out all sorts of insights. I picked up the phone and I called him, and his name's Keith, and we had a conversation, and he says, we're not doing big data. We're using point-of-sale data we've had for years. The only big thing about it is we've mapped geolocation data to our point-of-sale data, and all of a sudden we started seeing patterns on product and people and weather that we never knew about before, and now they're doing all sorts of amazing things. This is not rocket science, but it requires rigor. And now all of a sudden, and this fellow, by the way, he says their greatest measure of success in this is the cross-functional conversations they're now having that they never used to have before. Think about that. Data made that happen. Okay? So go mining. And here was the result of the Sloan survey. And it basically says those folks who are experimenting and innovating with analytics are seeing better results in existing and new processes and products and services. Pretty compelling results. So start innovating. Now context, that's the second thing. Context matters. It's not just apples and oranges. If you're diabetic, context is very important. Any of these things could send you into shock, right? So it's fruit, or it's produce, or it's something you have to be very careful with. Okay, so context is very situationally different to every one of us. So we need to really understand what context is. And in a big organization, context can be very elusive. Context on the same data can be very different at the senior level, at the manager level, at the team level, at the customer level. How to bring it all together? Well, we've been doing this for years. It is the value stream. You get a group of people together who represent the end-to-end process, and now you have a context that you can look at this data. Some of it is often very messy and random, but now you have a team of people who has context for what that data represents. You can now sort out what's meaningful from what's not meaningful. You know how to assemble it. You know how to work with it. You're no longer arguing about my data is better than your data, or my point of view is better than your point of view. Well, that all goes away the moment you have context, and that's what a value stream is from a data perspective. So a value stream steward, you could call this a chief engineer, you could call it a product owner, service manager, a tribe lead, call it whatever you want, but it is the person who sees and is responsible for bringing all of the stakeholders of the value stream end to end and establishing a shared context, or as Daniel Pink would say, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. It makes that happen and helps them do these things. But in the world of digitization, they also help them do these things. Sort out the data. Help develop technical capabilities within the team. The IT department is no longer the centralized repository of spooky knowledge. It is needed for some essential services, but we need to get as much technical capability into the business as we can, because that's where the ideas come from. That's where the execution comes from. Okay? And so that's the real shift here. Technology is part of our core competency going forward. And the IT folks are here to help us. We are here to help them. We're not opposed to it. But we need to do it as teams. And then there's this thing called omnichannel, which when you think of it in lean terms, it's a meta value stream. There are several value streams that come together into what we would call a single meta value stream. And why does it matter? Because this customer doesn't care what channel, they just want to be treated well. And there's a company out there that told us a story of that, right? Now, omnichannel, is one way in a bank, it's another way in another organization, but it's the notion of the meta value stream. It's somebody's got to own it and help sort it out and find the waste and continuously improve. This thing called alignment is perplexing, but we've heard it several times today. Antoine from Google talked about it this morning. Pierre from Toyota talked about it this morning, and here we are again. But what is alignment supposed to do? Read this. All of you have heard the word Hoshin a number of times. Hoshin Connery, strategy deployment. Antoine mentioned it. Antoine from Google said it's possibly the most underutilized lean tool. It's actually not a tool, but yeah, it is a tool, but it's more than that. But this is what it does. Hoshin helps at all levels of the organization develop a context to help us figure out those things that matter and attack those problems to get to where we're going. And it has to be very simple. So this is Pierre. I pulled this, Pierre, from your last presentation in the UK. Any further elaboration on what Hoshin looks like from a diagrammatic point of view will make your head explode. But it's a complex interactive model. The idea, though, is at all layers, at all organizational contexts, the same data is represented slightly differently, but how does it all link together to tell a story that ultimately has to engage the people in the value streams that are actually delivering the services to the customers? And that's what Hoshin does. And it is all founded on A3 problem solving. And you heard that from Pierre in his eHoshin story this morning. Is it easy to do? No. It's very difficult. But if you don't get past problem solving in each individual local context with an organization and start tying it together into alignment, you will not achieve these holistic things that become the DNA of your organization. So it's a scalable pattern where deployment and execution of a vital few imperatives are all we want. And isn't that all we've ever wanted? Clear intent, and this came from ING, focus on what you need to improve rather than what you can improve. That's the best statement of Hoshin, the essence of Hoshin I've ever heard. Thank you. Okay, and it promotes dialogue and learning. So in the digital age, simply put, leadership needs to set a bold challenge and focus on the few things that matter. The relationships between physical, digital, product, services, channels, partners, customers are dynamic, so a prescriptive model will not work. You need a relational model, more of an organic model, where the focus and the problem solving shifts. You heard Pierre say, well, we realigned the whole Hoshin with the tsunami. That was Toyota, completely suddenly, with a catastrophe, realigning the whole focus of the organization in a very short period of time. So it's capable of doing that. It's not rigid. There are a lot of folks out there right now trying to sell rigid, scalable management systems. And logically they work, but they're often too prescriptive. You can't implement something like that. You have to grow it. It has to grow. You have to make it your own. That's Hoshin. So reflections, last slide. What does this mean? It means you have to focus on quality before speed. We have to get in and sort things out. What do we do? What do we stop doing? What's the good data? What's the bad data? Sort those out. And then we can go fast and we can sustain the speed. We have to emphasize capability development for sustainable performance and adaptation. We all want to do this quickly. There's not an enterprise in the world right now that doesn't want to spin up a lean agile team and just hit it hard, bring in a big consulting firm by the busload and just do it to them. And it doesn't work that way. You maybe need to give it a push start. You may need to bring in a group of people quickly and kind of light the fire and get it going. But you must develop and scale the internal capability development as one of your primary goals. Otherwise, you'll create a dependency. And you will create this appearance of lean and agile, but it won't become part of your DNA. And if it doesn't become part of your DNA, don't even start. Use patterns and practices as guideposts, but don't do them prescriptively. Use them as patterns to suggest how you might do this too. And everything in the Lean and the Agile toolkit is a pattern. It's worked before. It might work again. But get to the principles of why those patterns work and stick to those. And finally, the human interaction, not just the data and the technology, is what makes an organization sustainable and continuously improving and innovating, not just this year, but next year and in generations to come. It's the humans that make that happen. Thank you.